Picture this. It's a foggy night in 1930s Cleveland. Freight trains rattle through dark rail yards, hobos huddle around trash fires, and in a ravine called Kingsbury Run, something is hunting human beings. By morning, police will find a headless torso, sometimes more than one. Limbs tossed in weed-choked lots, torsos stacked in gullies, severed heads placed almost deliberately, as if the killer wanted them to be found. These aren't just murders, they're dissections, the work of someone who understands anatomy, who knows exactly where to cut. Over the course of a few years, at least a dozen people will die this way. Their names, in many cases, never even discovered. Their killer, never caught. This is the story of the Cleveland torso murders, sometimes called the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Tonight, we're going to walk through one of the most disturbing, unsolved serial killer cases in American history, step by step, victim by victim. To understand the Cleveland torso murders, we need to step back into America between the Great Depression and World War II. Cleveland was booming and broken at the same time, steel mills roaring but shantytowns sprawling in the shadows. Into this mix walked a killer who targeted the city's most vulnerable, drifters, sex workers, the unhoused. In this video, we're going to break down the case chronologically, the first known victims, the grisly crime scenes, the police investigation, suspects, and the theories that still divide researchers today. We'll also look at Eliot Ness, the famous crime buster from The Untouchables, and ask how much of his hero story here is fact and how much is legend. If you're into deep dive, carefully researched true crime, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss future investigations. And stay with me to the end, where we'll put the leading theories head to head and talk about what might finally crack this case. Most people date the torso murders to 1935, but researchers now think the first known victim appeared in 1934. September 5th, a young man finds a rotting torso floating in the shallow waters of Lake Erie near Euclid Beach. No head, no arms, no legs, just a torso and part of a thigh. The medical examiner notes clean, precise cuts. This isn't a clumsy butcher with a hatchet. Someone used skill, likely a very sharp knife. The victim is male, around mid-20s, well-built. Fingerprints are impossible, and without a head, dental identification is out. Police nickname him the Tattooed Man because of several distinctive tattoos, which they photograph and circulate in newspapers. No one comes forward. Despite that media blitz, the Tattooed Man is never conclusively identified. At the time, investigators don't realize they're standing at the beginning of a serial killing spree. To them, it's a bizarre one-off, a grotesque mystery, but not yet a pattern. Early 1935, the pattern starts to emerge. On January 26th, two boys playing in the Jackass Hill area find a woman's torso in the snow, cleanly severed at the waist. The lower half is discovered days later. The head is never recovered. She becomes known as the Lady of the Lake by some researchers, though that title is sometimes given to another possible victim. Proof of how messy this case is. Then, in September 1935, workers in Kingsbury Run discover two more bodies, a decapitated, emasculated man in his mid-20s and another man whose body is decomposed but clearly dismembered. This is when detectives finally admit they're dealing with a repeating killer. The cuts are again disturbingly professional. Arms and legs removed at joints, vertebrae separated with confidence. The killer is stripping clothing, removing fingerprints, and often leaving bodies in semi-public spaces, hidden, but not too well hidden, almost like he wants discovery, on his terms. By 1936, the media has latched onto the story. Newspapers race to outdo each other with gruesome headlines. The term torso killer appears. That year brings some of the most infamous victims. June 1936. A teenage girl finds a head wrapped in trousers near a bridge. The body is discovered later, nude, mutilated, and dumped at the same site as a previous victim. A deliberate callback. The man is identified as 42-year-old Edward Andrassy with a minor criminal record. For once, police have a name. It doesn't help. September. Two more victims turn up near the railroad tracks. One is partially buried, the other left out in the open. Again, heads removed, limbs dismembered, genitals mutilated. The killer is consistent, yet evolving, more brazen with each dump site. Cleveland residents grow terrified. Hobos avoid Kingsbury Run. Parents warn children away from the ravines. The city's reputation is bleeding into national headlines, and city leaders are feeling the pressure. Enter Eliot Ness, already famous for leading the Untouchables against Al Capone in Chicago, now Cleveland's safety director, overseeing both police and fire. Ness is young, media savvy, and seen as incorruptible. Politicians and citizens alike expect him to solve the torso case quickly and decisively. Behind the scenes, though, Ness is walking into chaos. The Cleveland Police Department is fragmented, underfunded, and humiliated by their failure to catch the killer. Detectives have suspects, but no solid evidence. Witnesses are mostly transient, often intoxicated, and sometimes vanish before they can be re-interviewed. Ness sets up a special squad, quietly pours resources into surveillance and undercover work in the shantytowns. Publicly, he projects confidence. Privately, he's dealing with a meticulous killer who leaves almost nothing behind. No weapon, no clear pattern in victims beyond poverty and vulnerability. And the pressure isn't just about justice, it's about the city's image, industry, and political careers on the line. Let's talk about how the killer worked. The torso murderer's signature wasn't just dismemberment, it was methodical, almost clinical technique. Victims were typically decapitated, often while still alive, according to some forensic interpretations based on blood patterns. Limbs were removed at joints with clean cuts. In many cases, the bodies were drained of blood before dumping, which suggests the killings took place indoors, at a controlled site with access to water and time. The absence of defensive wounds on some victims suggests they might have been incapacitated, drugged, intoxicated, or attacked from behind. Several were known heavy drinkers or sex workers, groups more easily lured or dismissed by authorities. The choice of dump sites, creeks, ravines, railroad yards, vacant lots, points to someone familiar with the city's underbelly and transportation routes. Police and later profilers suspected medical training or at least butchering experience. This wasn't someone learning as they went. From the very first known victims, the skill level is disturbingly high. Between 1936 and 1937, the body count climbs. Some estimates put the total at 12 officially linked victims. Others argue for as many as 20, including earlier and borderline cases. Part of the problem, many victims were never identified, known only as John or Jane Does. A few stand out. Florence Polillo, a barmaid and sex worker, is found in baskets and bushel boxes in 1936, her body carefully wrapped in newspaper. Another victim is discovered in the Cuyahoga River, pieces bobbing to the surface. Yet another is found on the shores of Lake Erie, limbs washing up over days. The public narrative focuses on horror, but there's a human tragedy here that's easy to miss. These were people already on society's margins, poor, transient, sometimes struggling with addiction. Their disappearances often went unreported. For investigators, that meant missing timelines, no clear lost sightings, and families who might never even know what happened to their loved ones. By mid-1938, Cleveland is desperate for the nightmare to end. Ness, under fire from the press, makes his most controversial move. In August, he orders a massive raid on the Kingsbury Run shantytown. Hundreds of men are rounded up, questioned, and many are forcibly relocated. Then, in a dramatic, almost apocalyptic gesture, the shantytown is burned to the ground. Officially, Ness frames it as a public health and safety measure, eliminating the killer's hunting ground. Privately, it's also a show of force, a way to tell the public something is being done. Did it work? Here's where things get strange. After 1938, the officially recognized torso killings in Cleveland stop. No more dismembered bodies in ravines. No more headlines about the Mad Butcher. For some, that's proof Ness's scorch earth tactics scared the killer off or forced him to move. For others, it's just a coincidence, or a sign the murders continued elsewhere, unnoticed or unconnected. One of the most persistent questions in this case: did Eliot Ness quietly identify the killer but fail to prosecute? Many researchers point to a particular suspect, often referred to as a mentally unstable doctor from a prominent family. Different books give him different pseudonyms, but the broad outline is similar. This doctor allegedly had medical training, substance abuse issues, and a history that put him in the right places at the right times. According to some accounts, Ness personally interrogated him in 1938. The suspect reportedly failed a polygraph, which, remember, was very new and not fully reliable, and later committed himself to a mental institution. Supporters of this theory claim Ness felt he had the right man but lacked admissible evidence. Arresting a well-connected doctor on circumstantial grounds could have blown up politically. Critics counter that much of this narrative is based on later storytelling, incomplete records, and sometimes embellished memoirs rather than hard documentation. Beyond the doctor, investigators chase dozens of leads: rail workers, butchers, vagrants, even a former soldier or two. The sheer brutality and anatomical skill made people look hard at anyone with medical or slaughterhouse experience. One suspect, a transient butcher, was questioned heavily after being linked to a rash of animal mutilations. Another man confessed under pressure, only to have his story collapse under basic fact-checking. Some suspects were paraded in the press, then quietly dropped. Others exist only in fragmentary police notes and second-hand accounts. Adding to the confusion, experts disagree on which murders are truly part of the series. Some victims have all the hallmarks: dismemberment, decapitation, dump sites in familiar areas. Others are borderline similar but not identical. That ambiguity lets almost any theory find a foothold. If you widen the victim list, more suspects make sense. Tighten it and the pool shrinks. In the end, no one was ever charged. Officially, the case stayed open but dormant, collecting dust. Modern profiling offers a different lens on the torso killer. Based on victimology and method, many profilers see an organized, intelligent offender, likely male, with above-average knowledge of anatomy and at least moderate physical strength. He probably blended into everyday life, not a cartoonish monster. The choice of marginalized victims points to someone who understood policing biases of the era. Kill those who won't be quickly missed. The careful dismemberment and disposal suggest planning and perhaps a ritualistic element, even if we don't fully understand the psychology behind the mutilations. If this case happened today, investigators would have DNA from bone and tissue, trace evidence from dump sites, and geospatial analysis of where bodies surfaced. They might map the killer's comfort zone, probably somewhere between downtown Cleveland, the medical district, and industrial corridors. Some theorists even suggest the killer may have been a traveling offender, possibly linked to similar unsolved dismemberment cases in other cities, though that remains speculative. The torso murders didn't just terrify Cleveland, they reshaped how the city saw itself. This was a place proud of its industry and progress, suddenly forced to confront a nightmare lurking in ravines and under railroad bridges. In the decades since, the case has inspired books, films, and countless theories. Some portray Ness as a tragic hero who almost solved it. Others recast him as a PR-conscious official who burned shantytowns but never nailed the killer. The truth is probably somewhere in between. For families of possible victims, those few who were identified and those whose loved ones simply vanished, the lack of closure is its own kind of violence. Every new theory promises answers, then dissolves back into doubt. As we move toward wrapping up, keep in mind this isn't just a puzzle for armchair detectives. It's a window into how society values certain lives over others, and how that shapes which crimes get solved and which are allowed to fade. Let's pull together the key points in this maze of horror and uncertainty. First, the facts we can be reasonably confident about. Between 1934 and 1938, at least 12 people, probably more, were murdered, dismembered, and dumped in and around Cleveland. The killer showed consistent anatomical skill, targeted mainly vulnerable individuals, and used dump sites tied to the city's industrial and impoverished zones. Second, the investigation. Despite enormous pressure and the involvement of Eliot Ness, no suspect was ever charged. A likely candidate, a troubled, well-connected doctor, emerges in some accounts, but evidence remains thin and mostly circumstantial. The burning of Kingsbury Run may have disrupted the killer's hunting ground, but it also destroyed a community and potential witnesses. Third, the legacy. The case remains officially unsolved, a textbook example of early serial homicide investigation limitations. No DNA, rudimentary forensics, and strong class bias. It still haunts true crime, precisely because the monster behind it never received a name or a face. If you've stayed with me through this journey into 1930s Cleveland, you've seen how the torso murders are more than just shock value. They're a cautionary tale about fragile justice systems, neglected communities, and how quickly victims can vanish when society already sees them as disposable. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Eliot Ness really had the right suspect, but couldn't prove it? Does the doctor theory convince you, or do you lean toward a different profile, maybe a butcher, rail worker, or traveling killer? Drop your theories in the comments. I'll be reading and responding. If you found this deep dive worthwhile, consider subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and sharing this video with someone who loves detailed, respectful true crime analysis. It helps more than you might think and lets me keep tackling complex, lesser-known cases like this one. And if you want to follow up on possible linked cases in other cities, let me know. That might be our next investigation.